A ferry drops off Chris Vaughn to his hometown, Kitsap County. He is a freshly retired U.S. Army sergeant, and that's visible to all by the Army-issued duffel bag he carries. From the port, he walks straight to the Hamilton lumber mills, but frowns when he sees the notice of closure. He had hoped to apply for work in the mill, but he never thought that it would be shut down. Chris is just wondering what to do next when the sheriff stops by and asks him if he's all right. Chris asks the sheriff about the mill, and he replies it has been closed for 3 years now, and that the town's main attraction is the casino. Recognizing his name on the duffel, the sheriff offers to drive him home as a gesture of gratitude to all his years of service to the country. Chris accepts. The sheriff hands Chris his election pamphlet and drives off. He is welcomed home by his older sister, who is in her EMT uniform. Surprised at seeing him, she runs to him and hugs him. She calls her mom and her dad, who are also very excited to see Chris after 8 years away from home. His mom asks him how long he's back for, and he replies that he's back for good. They all have dinner, and his sister introduces Chris to her son Pete, who was just a toddler when Chris last saw him. Chris's young nephew is very disrespectful and rebellious, and asks him triggering questions about his time in the Army. Chris doesn't give many details, but explains that he was a sergeant. Pete scoffs and calls him a grunt and goes out to meet his friends. Pete is very annoyed by his uncle's presence because he is moved out of his room as it belonged to Chris long before Pete occupied it. Chris had planned to work in the mill when returned home, but since the mill was shut down, he had no other plans. This didn't mean Chris stayed idle. He began working on repairing his home. He's working on his porch stairs when his childhood best friend Ray arrives in his RV. They both have a happy reunion, and Ray fills him up on his life after Chris left. He tells him how he got into music and vices, which led to him being arrested for breaking and entering. Chris sympathizes with him, and Ray tells him he's been sober for a long time. He then tells him to get up because it's Saturday and that means it's time to play some rugby. They head to the field where Chris meets his old pals. Among them is Jay Hamilton, who is the owner of the closed Hamilton Mills and the casino in town. It's clear he's made it big, thanks to the shift in his profession. It's Chris's pals versus Jay's team. The match is very intense, and clearly Chris's team has an edge. Jay plays dirty and tells his teammate to go low and target Chris's weak left knee, which he injured in college. Jay's team wins the match, and he pretends to be worried about Chris's leg. He invites him to the casino and offers free drinks and VIP room access as a way of making it up to Chris. Chris accepts and tells him he'll be there tonight. While Ray and Chris are sitting on the ground resting after the game, Pete comes up and wishes him better luck next time. Chris, who had noticed Pete sitting in the bleachers illegally smoking with his friends, warns him that he better not see him smoking again. That night, Chris and his friends go to the casino, and Jay welcomes them to the VIP room. He arranges for a private room for Chris. A woman shows up to entertain him. It's one of his old school friends, Denise. He is uncomfortable with the situation and leaves the room in a hurry. He tells his friend he is leaving the VIP rooms. He heads downstairs to where one of his friends is betting on dice. He watches the game for a while when he sees the dealer switch out the dice. He tries telling his friend not to bet, but his friend, high on the rush of victory, doesn't listen. He loses, and Chris calls the dealer out on his cheating. Security arrives to escort Chris out of the casino. A fight breaks out where Chris injures 3 of the casino security guards, but is knocked unconscious after a while. He wakes up on a table in the storage room. 4 men surround him, and one of them tries taking his special forces tags for himself. Chris fights back and lands a blow on the offending man. The other 3 hold him down while the one Chris had punched decides to carve Chris up with a cutter. After they're done, they leave Chris for dead on a road far away from the casino. He is close to dying when a trucker finds him and rushes him to the hospital. The sheriff arrives at the hospital when the doctor is explaining to Chris's parents that a lesser man would have given in to his injuries. Since Chris is strong, he will bounce back from his injuries in no time. The sheriff asks for Chris's statement and toxicology report. His sister gets offended by this and tells the sheriff to do his job and find the perpetrators. The sheriff tells her this is part of his job and leaves. Chris is in a bad shape when Ray visits him. He puts up a brave face and jokes that this was a hell of a homecoming. Ray says that this place isn't home anymore. Jay's casino was destroying the very fabric of this town by targeting everyone's morals. Chris spends the next couple of weeks in recovery. Pete and Ray keep him company. Soon he is up and about. Chris plans on picking up some supplies from around town. He checks his garage and finds that his dad had kept his truck in good shape, hoping for his return. On his trip to town, he is disturbed by the amount of adult shops in town and how the casino was an income generator for this town. In his opinion, the town has become depraved. He is unloading his truck when Jay pulls over in his white Jeep. He apologizes and says that Chris's PTSD made the men nervous, and that's why the fight happened, and that the dealer was found guilty and has been fired. Chris asks about the security team, and he tells them they were reprimanded. He tells him he wants to offer him a job as his head of security, and Chris declines right away. He then leaves an envelope of cash for Chris's troubles. Chris is offended by this and returns the envelope back to him without checking and tells him he will press charges. But nothing's ever that simple, especially in this town. When Chris goes to the sheriff to press charges, he declines and tells him that because this casino is the greatest source of income for this town, it's basically untouchable. Chris is in disbelief and tells him that he won't stand for this, and the sheriff kicks him out of the station. Back home, Chris hangs his car keys and is just about to sit down and relax when the doorbell rings. It's Denise. She's brought back his jacket. Chris asks her to walk with him and talks about how the sheriff isn't much of a sheriff if he doesn't stand for justice. She tells him he should run for sheriff. He'd do a much better job than the current one. Chris contemplates that and asks her how her job at the casino is treating her. She quips that they treat her a lot better than they treated him. He judges her for working at the casino and she replies that bills need to be paid somehow and drives off. When Chris enters his house, he finds his mother sobbing and talking to someone on the phone. Pete is in trouble. Chris and his mother drive to the location and find that Pete has suffered an overdose of crystal meth. Chris interrogates his friends and finds out that the dealers are Jay's security guards. Chris gets his gun from home, but his father tries to stop him. If he takes this step, he can't come back from this. Chris is beyond listening, and he drives off with the gun. He stops in front of the casino and reloads his gun. He rethinks this, leaves the gun, and pulls out a small log of wood from the back of the truck. With that, he starts trashing the casino. He beats up the guards that try to stop him and takes back his tags from the guard who stole them. After wrecking the whole place and making his stance on Jay's activities clear, he leaves. Jay is now out to get Chris. The sheriff arrests Chris and he's brought to trial. His lawyer advises him to plead guilty and take the opposing side's deal. Chris declines and decides to represent himself. He tells the jury how he isn't guilty of anything other than standing up to Jay Hamilton, who is ruining this town with illegal vices and gambling. He shows the whole court the scars from his encounter with Jay's thugs. He also adds that it's all the sheriff's fault, and if he was to be the sheriff, he would deal with all the illegal activities in the town. The jury unanimously rules in his favor, and Chris walks free. In the following weeks, Chris's campaign is successful, and he is elected as sheriff. He shows up for duty the first day, signature wooden log in hand. The previous sheriff tells him how all his deputies are very reliable people. Chris takes one look at them and fires all of them because they were recommended by the corrupt sheriff. His first line of action is warning Jay Hamilton, who is cruising in his Porsche with a girl by his side. He stops his car and asks for license and registration. Jay warns him that Chris is a nobody and he should stop messing with him if he wants to live to see 40. Chris ignores his words and tells him he should probably do something about his taillights. Jay is confused and asks what's wrong. Chris breaks them with the log and answers that he should fix them if they're broken. Chris recruits Ray as his deputy and asks him to bring him up to speed about how to bring down Jay's drug business. With Ray's guidance, they first target the dealers and work their way up to the suppliers. Most get away, but they finally catch a supplier. It's Booth, the guy who injured Chris and stole his tags. Ray pats him down and finds evidence. Booth tells them that he wants to call his lawyer, but Ray and Chris have other plans. They tell him that they will need to check his vehicle. They take his Chevrolet truck, to which he has added a lot of modifications, and take it apart piece by piece. Booth warns them that his people will retaliate for this offense. Ray and Chris laugh it off in front of him, but Chris is more cautious, and he sends Ray to protect his family. He stays at the station and keeps watch over Booth. Denise visits him at the station while he's having a lunch of badly made ramen. She tells him he's lucky she brought over a proper lunch for him. They unpack the lunch and she tells him that she has quit Jay's casino. Chris is relieved and both of them finally give in to their passions. If Chris thought he would finally get a break from Jay and his goons, he was wrong. While Chris is otherwise occupied, Jay makes a call to the former sheriff. He shows up with 3 of his former deputies and blows up Chris's truck. "A truck for a truck," Booth shouts in glee. The former sheriff calls out to Chris that he should have stayed quiet. Now he has to face the consequences. All 4 of them open fire on the sheriff's station. Chris takes Denise with him, and they both take cover. Back at Chris's home, some goons have broken in. One of them ends up shooting Ray in the leg as he tries to protect Pete. The other 2 have rounded up Chris's family and are keeping them confined to a room. Pete runs away and Ray deals with the goon. Hearing the commotion, one of the goons from upstairs comes to check. He is shot by Ray, alerting the 3rd one, whom Ray bravely takes on. Back at the sheriff's, Chris shoots a hole into the floor, gives Denise a gun, and tells her to crawl in the space under to escape. He turns back to save Booth, who is begging to be released. He explains that he'll release him only if Booth tells him where the lab is. Booth tells him the old mill is being used as a cover. Chris frees him, but Booth stands up at the wrong time and is hit by the ongoing fire. Chris crawls under the floors and takes out all 3 of the goons. He rushes back home to find Ray finally knocking out the final goon. He approaches Ray from behind, and Ray, thinking he is another thug, decks him in the face. Distracted, they both don't notice a goon who soon holds them both at gunpoint. A second later, Chris's father shoots the goon and takes care of the situation. After making sure all his family is safe, Chris rushes over to the lumber mill to collect evidence, but Jay is already there, waiting for him. Chris walks right into Jay's trap and gets beaten pretty badly. They both fight, and Jay manages to push Chris out of a window. Because of the fall, Chris's left knee dislocates. He retreats into the surrounding forest to snap it back into place, but Jay is right on his tail with an axe, intent on finishing him off. The both of them have an intense fight where Jay has the upper hand in the start. But despite his injuries, Chris turns the tables and takes Jay by the chokehold. Chris breaks his leg and arrests him for all his crimes. Chris and Ray shut down the casino for good and restart the lumber mill again for the good of the town. Long after the dust settled in Kitsap County and Chris Vaughn restored order, one can't help but ponder the aftermath of those violent events. Looking back at the 2004 action-packed film Walking Tall, starring Dwayne Johnson, it becomes evident just how far an individual will go to bring justice to their hometown. Weren't we all on the edge of our seats as Chris wielded that iconic piece of wood, challenging corruption at every turn? If you found yourself in Chris's shoes, would you have taken the same relentless path to set things right? What would you have done differently if you were in Chris's place? Comment your answer below with #SinMaricat. Until next time.